Welcome, everyone, to the SEG Near Surface Geophysics Technical Section Student Subcommittee's webinar on GPRPy, which is part of our webinar series on open source software. The SEG Near Surface Student Subcommittee and myself will serve as your host for today's webinar. Before we begin, so for the model of this webinar, we'll have a short presentation from Alon Pletner here, who will introduce GPRPy, its features. And if you saw on the email link for the actual event description, there's some data that we'll be messing around with, answer some questions on GPRPy setup and usage. During the will then be followed by an extended Q&A session. During this time, if you'd like to ask any questions, we ask you during that extended Q&A session, you can just raise your hand and we'll address it. But any questions that come up over the course of Alon's presentation, we just ask that you throw that into the Q&A box. That makes it easier for us to capture the actual questions and respond to them. Anything in the chat ends up getting lost at the end. So thank you very much for doing that. Like I said, today's presenter is Alon Pletner. Alon is an assistant professor at the University of Alabama. He attained his PhD at ETH Zurich in Switzerland in computational geophysics back in 2011, specializing in electrical resistivity tomography. His bachelor's and master's are in mathematics from the University of Basel in Switzerland. He studies near-surface geophysics as well as planetary science. His near-surface geophysical research uses ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and induced polarization to image the shell subsurface. Through collaboration, he has applied these methods to a wide range of research questions, from hydrological studies to UXO detection to archaeology. Alon's planetary research focuses on crustal and core magnetic fields of the planetary bodies in our solar system. His work encompasses the planets Mercury and Mars, as well as Jupiter's moon Ganymede. Alon received a NASA Planetary Science Early Career Award back in 2020, and is the developer behind the free and open source ground-penetrating radar software GPRPy, which has been downloaded hundreds of times and is used at academic institutions all around the world. Thank you again, Alon, and feel free to take it away.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody, for coming and generally for your interest in GPRPy. So I prepared a short, 7-slide show, and then I'm going to go into a demo for installation and then a couple of applications. And I'm, of course, happy to take any questions. By the way, when you see the splash screen of GPRPy, this wiggle here, the tail of the snake or the body of the snake, is actually one of the GPR traces in one of the demo data. So you can even switch it out if you code a little bit and play around with one of the Python scripts within GPRPy. Okay, so first of all, what is GPRPy? Importantly, it is free and open source, so anyone can download it from this website here. But on top of that, you can also make it your own. So you can basically make a copy of it, edit it however you want, and distribute it however you want. In particular, it is under a permissive license, the MIT license, which means you can make money with it. You could take it, download it, not change it at all, and just start selling it to people for money. But I think there's some stipulations. I think you need to say where you got it from and where people can download it for free, something like that. But this is important for me because I I want to make it possible for people to use this for business and purposes as well. So anyone can do with it basically almost whatever they want. But what is it not? It is not backed by a large group of paid developers. So it's basically me alone, in my very limited free time as a tenure track professor, trying to make a few edits. And please be patient. Sometimes it can take me months to even see questions on GitHub. I'm really hoping that the community kind of starts more and more taking over, and that at some point, many people already created their own copy of GPRPy and started playing with it. And I'm hoping that more and more people do that, and people answer each other's question on GitHub and so on. So that's really the hope, that it becomes something that belongs to the community and is not just done by one person or a few people. So just a little bit about the philosophy. I like simple. The processing steps that I'm using is really the filtering that I'm doing or that GPRPy has implemented is subtraction of a running mean or replacement with a running mean. That's basically as sophisticated as I get. Okay, there is there is migration in it as well, but there are many more, of course, advanced filtering techniques, and some people already built them into GPRPy, and you're welcome to do that. And if someone creates a user interface around that, that's of course also welcome. But I personally like simple also in my own processing, because I want the original data that I collected to tell the story, and not, I just always fear that I'm putting structure in it that is not actually in the data. So that also applies to the software structure. It's as simple as I could make it. I know there are more fancy graphical user interfaces that one could build, but I try to pick the simplest one that works on as many devices as possible. And I'm also trying to make it depend only on the most robust and simple Python packages, such that not, if it depends on some like fancy package, the package could suddenly disappear and then it couldn't run anymore. So that risk is, I think, very, very low. If you do use GPRPy, of course, obviously you can do that however you would like. It will never cost you anything, but I'm asking that please cite it. This is an SEG journal, the leading edge, where I published a paper about GPRPy a couple of years ago. And of course, you know how it is for tenure track faculty. We get measured by how many people use our stuff, how many people cite us. So please, if you use it, here's the DOI, here's the citation. So I'm gonna show you how to install it quickly in a few minutes. But first of all, what you need is you need Python installed for it to work. On Windows, I just saw that, at least on my university Windows machine, this seems to be really easy to install. On command prompt, I just type Python and then it says, Python is not installed. Do you want to install it? I click yes, and it installed it. On Linux, it's similarly easy. On Macs, I think it sometimes comes installed, but I've seen people having difficulties with broken Python installation. I'll mention that a little bit later. Git is not necessary. It makes downloading and updating easier. But yeah, you don't need it. So you may ask yourself, why do I require Python? Can't I just make binaries like .exe files available, like for Windows, or I forget what they're called on Mac, DMG or something like that? Why can't I just create those? Well, the issue is that those constantly need updating such that they work with the latest version of Windows, latest version of Linux, latest version of Mac, and then things change between the versions and stuff breaks. This is not the case with if I just make it only dependent on Python, because then Python needs to fix all of its stuff. And I can just say, oh, it will just run on almost any operating system. Actually, I even managed to get it going on my e-reader. It's something similar to a Kindle e-reader, and I managed to get GPRPy running on it. I don't recommend this as a use case for it. It's really not very comfortable to use, but you know, it works. Thanks to that, it depends on Python, which exists for almost any electronic device. Today, I will also, just at the end, I will do a little bit of 3D visualization, where all of the calculation and the creation of the 3D data things, 3D objects, is happening in GPRPy. But if you want to visualize it, I did not reinvent a 3D visualization thing. So I'm just going to use ParaView. There are a couple of those. ParaView is also free, online, available from this website. I will just only quickly use it for like 2 minutes today, but if you want to try it out, you can download it maybe after this presentation. So generally, after you install GPRPy, on some systems, you can run it simply by typing GPRPy and then enter into your command line. On others, you may need to type Python --m GPRPy, or sometimes even Python 3 -m GPRPy. This is how it works on Windows. I'm going to show a demo on how to install it on Windows. And I'm then going to do some profile processing and visualization. This is going to be by far the biggest part. So installation will maybe take up 10 minutes or so. The second part, that will be most of an hour. And then we'll touch on these things quickly later. Chris, you mentioned that you wanted to do an extended Q&A session. Is that after the 90 minutes or is that during the 90 minutes?
That'd be towards the, like, after the 90 minutes or towards the end. That's just kind of been the structure for the other webinars. If we have time, we'll see just kind of how much of that we're able to fit in towards the end.
Okay, that sounds good. Great. So I'm going to do the installation demo on my Windows machine. So I'm going to quickly switch over. And then for the actual demo of the software, I'll switch back to my Linux desktop because I'm just more comfortable with Linux than with Windows. Okay, so what I'm hoping most of you did is that you downloaded GPRPy already from the website. I can quickly show you how to do that. I just Googled GPRPy, GitHub, and then you can click on, so this here's the website, github.com, and it stands for Near Surface Geophysics/GPRPy. Then you click on code, and then scroll down to download zip. I hope most of you already did that, and it should download this file called GPRPy master. If you obtained it via Git, then it will just be called GPRPy without the -master. And I copied it into this folder here and extracted it. I already did that to save a little bit of time. And the way you install it is in this folder. So in this case, it actually has inside GPRPy master, it has another GPRPy master. It doesn't really matter. And in here, you have all of these main installation files. And this is where you need to go. So you need to open in Windows a command prompt. This is where if you have not yet installed Python and you type Python, it will say, oh, it's not yet installed. Do you want to install it? And you click yes. At least in this Windows version that I have, I'm really not an expert on Windows. So it could be that every version is slightly different. But if you type Python and enter and this pops up, then you're good. You can then type exit, open, close parentheses to close it again. This is just to check that you have it. So what we need to do now is we need to navigate into this GPRPy folder. And we do that like our ancestors did back in the 90s. You can do that. CD is change directory, go to desktop, and then I call the folder GPRPy, and then GPRPy master, and then there's another GPRPy master in there because that's how it was packaged. Okay, and now dir shows me the directory content. So now in this location here, what you need to do if you want to install, well, if you want to have migration working in GPRPy, then you need to do this one little extra step that I'm showing you right now. The reason why I'm doing this is because the migration software, I didn't write it myself, someone else wrote it, and they put it out under a different license. They put it out under a GPL, GNU public license, which is very restrictive. Anyone can freely use it, but if you want to sell it or make money off of it, then there is a problem. And you're also not allowed to package it with a less restrictive license. And that's why I have it as a separate installation thing, just, you know, to protect those of you who want to earn some money with GPRPy. So you can install that. But if you just use it for academic reasons and don't want to make money with it, then obviously there's no problem. So you just type Python. And please let me know if the font or anything is too small. I try to make it as large as possible. Python space, and then install migration.py. By the way, if you start typing and then press tab, it auto completes. That's how I can type so fast. And what it will do, it will download stuff. And then next step is you just type pip install period. And it could take a little bit longer if you still need to download some other Python, if it still needs to download some other Python packages, but then it's basically done. So I've seen some Mac users having difficulties here. If that is what happens, you have Python installed as a Mac user, but when you type pip install period, then you're getting error messages. Try typing just pip, and if what happens is you see these instructions, then it may be something with GPRPy, and then please let me know. But if you then see error messages, then that means that your pip installation is broken, and then you can Google maybe Mac how to fix pip installation, and because that has nothing to do with GPRPy, unfortunately. Okay, so now if we want to run GPRPy, if I try to run it now in this folder, maybe some of you have tried and run into difficulties. If I type Python -m GPRPy here, it will not work. And the reason is that we're in a folder that also has a file. It works. That's weird. I thought it shouldn't work, but okay. So you can't run it from that folder itself where you can see all of these other files in it. So what you want to do, you want to go into any other folder. I'm going to, for example, go all the way back to just my GPRPy folder where I had downloaded things and run it from there. I'm actually surprised that it did work. It shouldn't. But now it will start. And so the first thing it will ask you is, do you want profile or common midpoint? You can type P and then enter for profile. That's what we're going to talk about first. Another way of doing this, I just press cancel, is you can directly type Python -m GPRPy and then P, and it will directly go into the the profile mode. By the way, this could also take a little bit longer the first time you start it because Python needs to organize some packages in the background, but then the second time it should pop up just as quickly. You see that here it looks kind of like squished and weird. That's because I set the screen resolution to such a low level that it's easy to see all of the words and everything. It should look hopefully nicer on your other desktop. But yeah, that's my installation instructions for Windows. I'm gonna switch back to Windows, and please ask me anything if there's any question about this. I thought that could be useful to quickly see the Windows installation. Hey, if there are no questions, then I just want to. Oh, sorry,
we do have a quick one asking if GPRPy can be installed in an Anaconda environment.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I actually even typically recommend Anaconda. Or I used to recommend Anaconda because I thought it was the easiest way of installing Python. But on Windows, it's now even easier apparently, which I only just found out like 2 weeks ago. So I haven't changed my descriptions everywhere. But yeah, it works great on Anaconda. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I actually didn't see that question. Maybe it didn't come through to me.
I'll also remind folks to, if you have any further questions, to put them into the Q&A box in Zoom, just so we can capture those at the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So before I continue, I want to just very quickly explain some of the terms I'll be using. So when I talk about profile data, what I mean is that, so when we have the surface here, and we want to look at what's in the subsurface, and our system is a transmitter and a receiver that are at a fixed distance from each other. Sometimes with some systems, they may even be in a box, in particular when you have higher frequency antenna. And what we're doing is we're just dragging this along, and at each location, maybe it's connected to a trigger wheel or we trigger it by finger, and at each location, we collect what I call a trace. And each trace consists of individual pixels or, samples, as I will call them. And all of my filtering, so replacement with a moving mean or subtraction of a moving mean, is based on samples, right? So if you want to do your filtering window based on nanoseconds, then you need to know how many samples per nanosecond you have. And then you can calculate how many samples you want to have for a 100 nanosecond window. Let's say, for example, you have 5 samples per nanosecond, and you want to do a 100 nanosecond window width filter, then you would put in 500 samples. Okay, so let's get going. What I did here is I just put the GPRPy folder that I downloaded into this folder here and the data folder as well. And we're going to focus mostly on this one here because that's where all of our most of our example data is in. Most of the example data that we're talking about today was already provided with the GPR data. Oh, someone just asked, oh, okay, I see it on my other computer. Someone asked, I couldn't install a program because you moved so fast. Will the film of the seminar be available to us later? Yes, absolutely. Okay. So I'm just gonna open this terminal here. So yeah, on Mac and Linux, it's called terminal. On Windows, it's called command prompt. So I'm in this folder here. And remember, we can start GPRPy from anywhere except for the folder that has all of these things in it. So I'm going to start it from one folder higher up, -m GPRPy. For Mac users, you may need to type Python 3, also for installation pip3. But yeah, I'm going to go straight into the profile, so P. And let's have a little look at what we see. So the general organization that I set it up with is up here are the buttons that control the view, the visualization. And here are the buttons that do the processing. The undo button will only undo processing, not visualization things. And you can only undo one processing step. The reason for that is because the way that I implemented the undo button is that I save, every time you do a processing step, I save the previous status and then load it again. And so if I do like 10, if I had the option for 10 undo steps, then I would need to keep 10 copies of the data in the memory. And if you want to process large data sets, then that would make it quite difficult for your computer to handle it. But this way, it's only twice the memory required as you have the data size. Here again is the DOI of the paper. I know you can't copy paste from here, so I put this same name also in this please cite text file. You can just open it and then copy paste the DOI from there. Also, please let me know if I'm too fast. I'm happy to slow down a little, or if this is okay. Okay. So also you notice that whenever you hover over some of these buttons, then you see a tiny little quick help thing. Okay, let's open our first data set. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to put in a text file at the bottom here, which data file I just opened. And then, you know, if you miss that second, you can look it up. Oh, someone just asked, is it possible to use for profiles that are taken on cylindrical surfaces? I mean, that the display and processing procedures that are necessary for this purpose. It depends on what kind of processing you want to do. So in principle, what you could do, in principle, yes, that's a cool question. So let's say you have, let's say this here is the surface, and you basically just, no, let me draw it differently. Viewed from above, you basically record along a circle. And so if you have the GPS coordinates, you just start somewhere and you have the three-dimensional, the UTM coordinates of all of your points. Then you could just do a profile processing. The only problem is that the GPRPy only does profile processing, so it will not know that the beginning and the end touch each other. But away from there, you could just do the profile processing and then export it in 3D again. I'll talk a little bit later how to do that. And then you get your cylinder. It's just the processing doesn't know that there is a connection between the beginning and the end. Cool. I've never even thought about that. It's cool. Okay, let's open a data file. So I'm going to go to GPR Pi Master. So we're not yet touching the GPR data. We're just in the regular software that we installed. Here we have our install migration, please cite, and all of these. Now you go into the GPR Pi folder, and in here you will see example data. We'll also touch the example script a little bit later. But example data is what we're doing now. We're using the SNS, stands for Sensors and Software first. We also will talk a little bit about GSSI data. It can also use other data formats. And here we have common offset and wide angle reflection and refraction. We're going to do the common offset one. Okay, here I have the actual data and a header file. That is how sensors and software data are stored in a DT1 and then an HD file. And I also have the 3D UTM coordinates here. Let me quickly open this one just to show you how. Oh no, sorry, I didn't want to open it. I thought I was in the, okay. I'll do that a moment later. But so we can either open the DT1 or the HD. It doesn't matter which one you pick. It will always assume that they have the same file name and just a different ending. So if you have a different file name for your header and your DT1 file, it will not work. Okay, so this is what we see. This is just the whole raw data. We don't yet see that much. So maybe we want to change the contrast a little bit, or maybe the way the data are displayed. Here, for example, if you want to change to blue, white, red, you click on blue, white, red, nothing happens because every time you change something with the view, to activate that change, you need to press refresh plot. Okay, now it worked. We change the contrast to, let's say, 100. I press enter, nothing happens because I haven't yet pressed refresh plot. This is to make sure that if you want to change a couple of things, you can just press refresh plot once it's all done. Okay, so one of the things that I find quite useful is, let's say, for example, you want to know, okay, where is this interesting feature here? I can eyeball that it is roughly at, maybe 120 meters along the profile and maybe 200 nanoseconds deep. But if you click on it, then you will see coordinates here pop up. X is just the coordinates on the x-axis, y is coordinate along the y-axis, in this case, time. It will switch then, of course, to depth once we did once we entered the velocity. Okay, so one of the things you may have noticed is if you resize GPRPy, then the coordinates, or if you resize GPRPy windows, then the coordinates will disappear. And when you click, they don't reappear. Unfortunately, that has something to do with how that the clicking listener works, but we can get it back if we just click on refresh plot. Refresh plot, and it's all nicely back. So yeah, no problem. Can always use this. By the way, right now you see that it's covered by this gigantic 0 because I set the resolution of my screen to so low, but on a normal screen, it should not overlap. It should be nicely in the corner. Okay, I promise that I will show which file I have open. So let me quickly find that text file. Okay. Just for you to make it easier for you to follow along. So down here, you now see which file is open. I'll keep it down here. Okay, so let's have a look at changing the view a little bit. For example, maybe what we want to do is I just saw a question. Is it possible to extract data in MATLAB math format? The answer is no, but there is actually a really cool workaround to that one. So the way you can do that is if you go to GPR, the GPR Pi, or actually the NS Geophysics website, the GitHub website. Come on. Spelled it. Okay, here we go. There you will see that there is another repository called GPR to ASCII, and you can use this one here to turn data that you saved in GPRPy's format into text data, ASCII data, and then you can import that ASCII data into MATLAB. Great question. Thank you for asking. Okay, so we wanted to seal it. Oh, by the way, Chris, is it okay if I answer these questions as we go, or would you prefer me to wait until later?
No, absolutely. If you have good stopping points to like answer as you go. More than welcome it.
Great, cool. It's awesome. It's fun to interact with people. I teach like that. I have students text questions and I try to answer them live. It's fun. In my large classrooms, not in the small ones, of course. Okay, so we wanted to, for example, have a look at a smaller window. So let's see, we only want to look between 0 meters and 50 meters. Then we just click on set X range and a little window will pop up. We can enter the minimum value. Or maybe let's say we want to look between 10 meters and 60 meters. We type 10. And then the maximum X value window pops up, proposes the maximum value. Let's put in 60. Okay, this one immediately, we didn't need to click refresh plot, it immediately showed it. And maybe we only want to have a look at time between, let's say start a little bit even earlier, -10 to 200 nanoseconds. So set Y range, -10 to, let's say, for example, 200 nanoseconds. Okay, so what we see here is that there is a little bit of data already before 0. And then what we see is these bands that go across. This is because we used unshielded antennae here. I want to tell you maybe a little bit about this data set before we carry on, such that it's more fun. So this data set was collected in Yosemite Valley by my student Christine Liu and myself and some helpers in the field. So if you're familiar with Yosemite Valley, you may have heard of El Capitan, which is this major cliff face. I'm not doing it justice. It's even steeper, like this major cliff face that stands out there. It's about 1 kilometer tall or something like that. And of course, at its granite, and of course at its foot, it has a talus, just boulders, deposits, and so on. But then it has this like almost horizontal hummocky surface, and then only do we enter the actual Yosemite Valley. And so we wanted to study this hummocky surface here, actually before we get to the talus, because this is thought to be a rock avalanche that came down about 3,500 years ago and just flowed like an avalanche into the valley. And the question is, of course, what is the base of this rock avalanche? So that's what we're looking at. I think this is maybe making it a little bit more fun. Okay, so once you're stuck into these narrower views and you want to go full out, you just click full view again and you see everything. Okay, I'm not going to go into aspect ratio right now because aspect ratio between time and profile position is it's a little bit difficult to, it doesn't make that much sense, let's say. Okay, so let's have a look at these, the processing step. Adjust profile, what it does is if you, let's say, for example, you have your tape measure the opposite way of your actual profiling, then maybe you want to flip it, your profile here. And so adjust profile can do that. Adjust profile can also, if you, let's say these values of your, the locations of your traces are measured with a trigger wheel, but you actually know that your trigger wheel is a little bit off or so, and you have them measured with a tape measure, and you want to enter their actual beginning and endings like you measured them on the tape measure, then you can also do that with adjust profile. Here, everything is fine, so I won't go into that detail. Set 0 times. So if we go zoom out a little bit again here, let's do -10 to maybe 200 for the y-axis, and go to, let's say, grayscale. Then you see that we have a little bit of measurements that happened before the onset of our first arrival. And maybe we want to cut those out to avoid that they affect our analysis. So that's what set 0 time does. And in this case, actually in the field, I made sure that the onset of the first trace, of the first move out is exactly at 0. So it did record a little bit before that, but we could just set 0 time, and then I'll just enter 0 here. If your first arrival is further down, maybe at 20 nanoseconds, you want to put 20 or something like that. Okay, align traces is really useful if you have something like if you have unshielded antennae like we have here. So this is, I forget if it's 100 megahertz or 50 megahertz, which are this is with the 50 megahertz antenna, they're quite big. They're like 2 meters long, and putting them into a shielded box would make it really difficult to carry them around in a forest. And so we have them in separate and connected them with strings, and then just walked around, put it down, tried to keep the strings taut, but their distance, of course, always varies a little bit. And so the first arrival always varies a little bit. And this align traces program can actually find the maximum move out of the first arrival and then align them. So when I click that, you'll immediately see it's much less jagged. So that's kind of useful. Undoes that traces. Okay. Someone just asked, please send me a link to download the data. If you have GPRPy downloaded or installed, then you have the data already. It's in the GPRPy folder, example data, census and software, common offset, and then xline 00.1. Okay. So maybe, and in particular in this case, we see that even if we put the contrast to really high, that's too high. We don't really have any signal beyond 400 nanoteslas, really, or maybe 500, but let's say 400 for now. So cut profile just cuts everything below 400. If I type in 400, no, I apologize. That is truncate Y does that. Cut profile would cut the profile at 200 meters if I type 200, which I won't do here. We want to use the full one, but truncate Y is the y-axis. Let's say we want to cut that 400. And then we can now make this the full view by just clicking again on full view. Okay, cut profile can do the same just for the along profile position. I apologize that I accidentally pressed that one first. Okay, so let's start a little bit with some actual processing, with some filtering. As you can see, we have these weird bands here, and they're really just because of DC buildup. So we can use dwow, which subtracts a moving average along each individual trace. And we need to give the averaging window as number of samples. If you give a very small averaging window, then you'll basically subtract most of your trace. So what I like to do is I like to generally just use very, very large numbers. If you don't know how many samples your entire trace has, just give a ridiculously large number and it will just take the average over everything, over your entire trace, and subtract it. So if I do that, okay, this looks a bit better, right? No more DC buildup. Cool. We can do the very same thing, just horizontally. Remove mean trace, just averages all traces along a certain window width, so however many traces you want to use, and then subtracts that moving average window. You can do very, very narrow windows, which will filter out a lot, but I prefer to just subtract the average over all traces in the hope that this will remove our air wave, right? The wave that between our unshielded antenna moved with the speed of light in air from the transmitter to the receiver. And that's these bands that we see up here. And please, stop me with any questions or if any of this is unclear. I actually just saw that someone asked any plan to support SGY format. And so I'm hoping that someone else will do that. Right now, so there is a way of exporting the GPR data into, so the GPR Pi processed data into ASCII, so just numerical values in a big numerical value file, and turning that into SGY or SegY files should be possible, but I'm hoping that someone else would write a little script that can do that. Should hopefully be not too tricky. Someone else asked, can I use the impulse radar data.iprb with GPRPy? I don't think we currently have that implemented. And it really depends on how the data format is, how it's saved. If it's just a binary with a header, a separate header in ASCII, then that would be quite easy to implement. If it's not, if it's some proprietary, complicated format that has header information in the binary, like the GSSI files, then it could be a little bit trickier. It has a header file, so it could actually be, maybe either send me an email with example data, or open a case on GitHub. But I'm happy to have a look and implement it if it's not too complicated. If I need to do reverse engineering of proprietary formats, then I'm hoping to. I won't be able, unfortunately. Okay, great. Okay, so we're back here where we just subtracted the average trace, and maybe let's reduce our contrast a little bit. And now we still have the strongest signal, of course, close to the surface. So what we want to maybe do is some gain. You can use either automatic gain control, where you enter a window width. I personally really prefer TPOW, which is just a function that you provide the exponent, and it then takes time to the power of the exponent you provided and multiplies each pixel along each trace with that value. So if I click TPOW, you could do, for example, 1 would be linear, 0 would just be multiplying with a constant, which doesn't do anything. And yep, this is maybe not too bad. Yeah, I kind of like this, right? So even linear was already good enough. We can now see that there's stuff happening here at later times. You can always undo. Can try the automatic gain control, maybe with, let's make 100 samples, or let's maybe, I don't know, 50 samples. I find this one harder to interpret. I like TPOW. Okay, cool. I skipped the smoothing steps here, but I can quickly explain what they do. So smoothing temp means we're along each individual trace, we are replacing a running window, replacing each a number of samples with the average over these samples. So, and because you do that in a running mean fashion, it's going to smooth out little wiggles. I typically don't use that because I like to see what I actually, what the data actually does, but you know, it can make your data maybe look a little bit nicer. And profile smoothing does the same, but along the traces. So you take a couple of traces, average them, and replace each trace with that average, and then you move that window along and do that averaging. Someone just asked, what is the function? What is the function of TPOW? The function of TPOW, oh, I can quickly draw that. So this here is time, and this here is gain amplitude. And it is something that looks like this, and this function is t to the power of p, and p is what we need to supply, or what we need to give. Okay, someone just said that's the same for seg-y data. It comes with a header. Okay, so what I mean with binary and a header, and I'm so glad I have this drawboard here. What I mean with binary data and a header is that I mean that you have basically two files. The first file is a binary file that basically is the same as a matrix that just has numerical values for each of the cells. So it's basically just a list of numbers like 2.3, 5.9, 0.6, and then something below that. So it's a matrix of numbers that represents the data. And I think when I once looked into seg-y data, I thought it was something more complicated with some headers, and the traces were structured in some way. So I kind of gave up relatively quickly. But I encourage everyone, please, please, please write scripts and make them available to everyone. And let's make GPRPy together even better. Thank you. Oh, and someone mentioned that there is software that can translate between different data formats. And that's, of course, another way. Oh, someone asked, what is the function for automated gain control? The function for automated gain control is that for each window width, so for each range of pixels, I calculate the norm of these pixels, and then divide each pixel by that norm. And so by doing that, I make pixels with a bigger norm. So let's say this here is our trace. I first take, let's say, this window here, calculate the norm of this window, so the sum of the squares of, or the RMS of this window, and then I divide each pixel value by that RMS. And then I do the same for this window here, and then the same for this window here, and so on. That's how I implemented automated gain control. I hope that's how it's also in standard implemented in other software packages. Okay, so we already see something in the subsurface, right? This could be the base of the rock avalanche. But of course, we can't know the depth. We need a velocity. And we can, I do have if you do have antenna that you can move separately, and you can have a common midpoint or a wide angle reflection and refraction data set, then that's something that of course can be used, and which I used here. But sometimes we don't have that. Sometimes we just have profile data. So how can we figure out the velocity? Well, we all remember the good old hyperbola. If we see something in the subsurface that looks like a hyperbola, then maybe we can use that hyperbola. If it is, a confined object like a pipe or a rock, then maybe if it's confined enough, then the traces that we measure around it give us the shape of a hyperbola. And so it looks a little bit as if we have a hyperbola maybe here. So let's maybe zoom in a little bit here. Let's do maybe between x20 and 70. I'm just going to put minimum x value is 20, maximum x value, let's say 70. And okay, here's a hyperbola. It's a bit too stretched, so let's maybe say time between 50 and 250 maybe. So I'll just type those, the input boxes showed up on my other screen, but I just quickly typed it in there. So here is our hyperbola. Let's see where the apex could be. It's not a very nice one, and I didn't use this to figure out the velocity. I'll show you in a moment how I did. But if I click here, okay, the apex is at roughly 52 meters along the profile and at 141 nanoseconds. So we can use this show hyperbola, and it will ask us where is the apex, the x-axis first, and we said 52. So I'm going to enter 52, and then it asks what is the time. We said 141, so I'm going to enter 141, and now it's asking us, what do you guess the velocity is? What should we say? It's sand, right? It's basically from granite, right? So sand is always 0.1 roughly. Soil is maybe 0.07 or something. And so we don't have a huge range, but let's try something. Let's try something wrong. It's definitely not soil, right? But yeah, okay. This hyperbola doesn't really fit very well. We can remove it by clicking refresh plot. We can also keep it. I can just put in exactly the same one. It stored the most recent numbers that I entered. By the way, this is a relatively recent feature. So if you install GPRPy like half a year ago, then this feature is not yet there. So, okay, here's our old hyperbola. We want to maybe show another one at the same location. So we use the same X and Y axis, but let's set a more reasonable velocity for sand or granite dust, 0.1. And yeah, it's a little bit better. It's still not great, but you know, maybe here it fits a little bit better. But okay. But I know from my war and actually no, let's do that quickly, otherwise no one will believe me anymore. I'm gonna draw the hyperbola now up here, which is maybe a little bit easier to see. That's 52 and 131. Okay, that's 52 is the same, but time is now 131, and velocity we do again 0.1. Okay. Oh, dry sand is about 0.13 to 0.15. Okay, cool. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Let's see. Let's try that one actually. I like that. Thank you. Okay, same location, and let's try 0.13. Yeah, that could also be. That looks pretty good too. And the reason why I picked 0.1, I can show you later, is with the wide angle reflection and refraction data where I got 0.1. But this seems to work at least for this rock here. Although, yeah, it's maybe between those two. Doesn't really matter because this is not an ideal hyperbola, right? Okay, so from, let's say, from somewhere else, which I'll show you a little bit later, we got rate of wave velocity of 0.1. If you want to, you can also use a different number, of course. But this is the one that I got from a wide angle reflection and refraction experiment at the same location. I got 0.1. And when I click enter, it switches. When I set that velocity, it switches to from time to depth. And again, we're still zoomed in into that one part, and we can go back out again if we click on full view. Okay, so it looks like as if this interface that we see is dipping close to the surface, going down to maybe 10 meters, and then doing some weird stuff. I have a button here, antenna separation correction, which I'm not sure how really useful it is. I implemented it because I sometimes work with antennae that are really far apart from each other. So this is the surface, and your transmitter is here and your receiver is here, and they're at a fixed distance, and you do a profile with those, then you know, you're assuming that your trace is going straight down and up, but in actuality, it does this triangle. And so for stuff close to the surface, this could actually have an effect. And so we can basically divide by that extra distance that it needs to go. And that is what that function does. I haven't yet used it for any research, but I just put it in there just in case it's useful. Okay. But FK migration, if you did that extra step in the installation, then you can actually use it now. So you need to have, of course, set the velocity set. So click migration. It changes it a little bit. I know migration in GPR processing is a little bit, some people think it's too aggressive. Some people think it helps. It can help with dips of your of interfaces. I like it. It also cleans the data up a little bit, but it's not critical, I think. But once we did all of that, we want to, of course, correct the topography. The way I implemented this here is that I just move up and down individual traces based on the topography. So it's a very crude, just shifting of traces. And we need, of course, a file with the coordinates. This can be provided in two different ways. One way is either a long profile position, so 0, 1 meter, 2 meter, and so on. And for each of those elevation. Another way is you can provide UTM coordinates. But if you do the UTM coordinates, which you give as easting, northing, elevation, if you do that, then you must make sure that the first UTM coordinate you provide is also your first trace, and the last UTM coordinate you provide is your last trace, and then it does that stretching between those. So the GPS data that I provided here, it's again, remember, we're just going into the same folder and look at the GPS, the UTM coordinates. So it's in sample data, census and software, common offset. Here we have, it's comma separated ASCII values. This is easting, this is northing, this is elevation. For yeah, these coordinates are of course close to El Capitan in Yosemite Valley, where we collected the data. Okay, so we got to remember it's comma separated. So when I now say topo correct, then we pick the file. By the way, it always goes into the most recently opened folder. At least it does that on Linux. It may do something slightly different, and this box may look slightly different on Windows or Mac. But so yeah, let's use these coordinates here that we just had a look at. We need to tell it's a comma or tab separated. Let's say we know it's comma separated, and this is what it looks like. Okay, so this looks, it's not perfectly horizontal, but maybe a little bit. Pretty. We have the grid that we can show, so yeah, more or less. A question just came in. As you know, topography is not only about moving the traces. Do you have any measures to overcome the effect of antennas in topography? And my response to that is no. Well, we do have the antenna separation correction that you could do before shifting the traces up and down. But then again, the goal of this is just as simple as possible. This is just really a tool that I didn't want to implement any complicated things. But if some of you would like to do that, then I strongly encourage you, please do that and make them available. Or we can work together on doing that, having these more advanced ways of implementing topography. So I just picked the simplest possible thing because I like simple, as I mentioned in the in the beginning. But of course, if many of you think that that's not good enough and data analysis shouldn't be done in this way, then I really want to know that, because I'm not the greatest expert on GPR. I use it, learned about it, I find it fascinating, but I haven't done any theoretical development in GPRPy. Cool, thank you. Someone said, I'm very eager to work on this issue. Great, yeah, then let's talk about it. Okay. So something else that I find quite useful, that I really wanted to have in a GPR software, is the ability to pick or identify interfaces that I can see. And that you can do that with the start pick and stop pick. So when you click on start pick, you can start selecting points along your profile. This is really difficult, of course, when you're zoomed out. So maybe we want to zoom in a little bit. Say we want to X between 0 and 100. I didn't move over the box that just popped up, but I hope you can imagine that that's what I did. I can quickly move it over, and maybe also do this one here between 1195 maybe, and let's say 1210. Okay, so we can now try to follow one of those interfaces, or just the wave that we interpret as an interface. Well, if you click accidentally somewhere else, the undo command in this case removes the most recent pick. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do it very quickly, randomly, without much effort, just to demonstrate what we can do once we have picked an entire interface. So I know this is terrible, but let's say this is our interface that we picked with great care and over an hour of taking being very, very careful, if you click on stop pick, you can save it. Let's put it in a folder that is easy accessible, just in my GPR general folder that I put on my desktop. Let's call it my picks. So when you do that, you will see that in your folder, you have two files. You only get two files if your topography data that you entered is UTM in UTM coordinates, so 3D, or any 3D coordinates that have meters in all three axes. If you only did along profile, then you will only get my picks profile, or whatever you called it, where you have this is along the profile distance and this here is elevation. But if you did it in 3D, you get the UTM, or whatever your 3D coordinate system is that you used. You get these three coordinates, which can be quite useful if you want to do 3D interpolation of different profiles. And we'll talk about in a moment how to do that. A few more things. If you save the data, it's saving it as a .gpr file, which it's basically it's a Python pickle file. If you're if you have background with Python, so let's do that maybe. And the script that I showed earlier on GitHub that can turn this into just an ASCII data matrix with a header file. You maybe want to use print figure. Well, maybe we actually first want to set the aspect ratio to 1, or maybe 1 is actually not that great. We don't see that much, so let's maybe set it to 3-fold stretching of the y-axis. And yep, can print the figure. It will ask you about resolution. The higher the resolution, the more data, but the more memory it will use, but it will also look nicer. Just picked 400. Export to VTK. This one is useful if you have a if you gave it the 3D coordinates of your profile. So what you basically can do is, just going to save it again, my profile as VTK, and I'm now going to open it in a 3D software like ParaView. Oh, sorry, I just someone asked a couple of questions are in there. Okay, I'm going to quickly now go over them. So the first one was, is it possible to visualize multiple swaths? If with multiple swaths you mean several profiles, if what you can do, so not in this profile processing and visualization, not in this graphical user interface, but what you can do is you can, for example, export several profiles into 3D and then plot them next to each other. That's one way of doing it. What velocities were used for the migration? The ones that are set in set velocity, and it's a constant velocity. So this is Stolz migration. And someone else said, as you know, a powerful tool is to use attributes to pick. Have you defined a specific attributes in this field? The picking here is purely by hand. There is no attribute detection implemented in GPRPy. I of course encourage anyone to build these additional tools into it, or have them as maybe side software that can run with these. But the goal of this was really the simplest way of trying to see what is in the raw data. Someone else said, what's a GPR .gpr format exactly? Can we load the file again with GPRPy? And the answer is yes, exactly. It is the binary data of your profile together with the last undo, I think also put in there, together with all sorts of choices that you made along the processing. And all of that is stored into a Python pickle file. That is the .gpr file format. Oh, another question is it possible to change the font sizes of the axis? And the answer is yes, if you script it a little. I'm going to show you very soon how to do that. So I just clicked on export to VTK, which created a VTS 3D file, which we're going to look at in a moment. And one other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Write Script. And this helps with answering the question, how can I change font size or labels of all the axes or anything? So if you type here, let's say we call this one my script. You save it, you will get this myscript.py file, which is a complete Python program. So here, every single step that you did, it was stored. You can, if you do undo, it's going to delete that line. And so it's basically writing this document internally. And when you click Write Script, it's going to save it. GPRPy, of course, is not the only software that can do this. Recipe also has a, I think they call it API or something like that. But here we just call it the MyScript. I find this really useful because if I want to change something, let's say I want to change the DWOW or where I truncate, or I want to change the velocity, then I can just save this. And then maybe I want to save my individual name, the way I export it. I want to maybe save it as my data 2 and my figure 2, my profile 2. Oh, by the way, export VTK, you want to have aspect ratio of 1. So let me quickly redo that, because if you have aspect ratio 3, then in the 3D plotting, it will show it kind of weirdly outside of where it's supposed to be. I was thinking about if I should fix that, as in like make it such that the aspect ratio is always 1 when exporting 3D, but then maybe someone wants it to be something else at some point, and then it would be a useful feature. So I'm going to put aspect ratio back to 1. And then say, again, export to VTK. Let's call it, again, my profile. Just overwrite that old file. Okay. And of course, we can save it also with the different velocity. Now, this Python program, you can actually just run from the command line. So if you just open your command prompt or terminal for this directory here, and then you just type Python and then the script name, what was it? myscript.py. Oh, of course, I misspelled it. It's with a capital S. Then it redoes the entire analysis for you, saves everything. And of course, you can, if you, let's say, close GPRPy and you open it again, then you can import the .gpr data. And yep. This is now with a velocity of 0.13. As you can see, this interface dips a little bit steeper in that case, but with all steps already done. All right. So I want to now quickly show you how that 3D profile looks like. So I'm going to open Pair View. And let's take the one. Yep. And this is it here. We can do horizontal x-axis or y-axis. As you can see, the colors are really faint, so maybe we need to set them to their actual range. Remember, these colors don't have a physical meaning anymore because we did so much processing, subtracting, multiplication, renormalization that I wouldn't interpret them physically. In the original data, you may interpret them as volts or something like that. Okay, here we see it better. Okay. Oh, someone said, Sina said, sometimes when I click on data analysis button, the undo doesn't work. For example, I click on FK migration and the plot now is gone and undo doesn't bring back the previous plot. What am I doing? Oh, yes. Yes, I know. You found a bug that I found as well about a month ago. please update to the most recent version. So yes, okay, what happened in that older version is that if the last processing step that you did was topography correction, then it internally it remembers that, oh, if I do undo, I need to go back to the time axis. And then if you do something else and then click undo, then it kind of undoes that time axis. It was something really stupid and weird that I managed to fix it. So yeah, it shouldn't happen anymore with the most recent question. Most recent version. Thank you for asking. Okay. So we're now already in the slightly more advanced stuff where we go into scripting. By the way, if you do want to change font sizes or anything, this is where you can do it. So instead of print profile, you can use Python plotting functions. Actually, there is even an example on how to do that in your GPRPy folder, the GPRPy here, example scripts. And then I think here the draw picked is also where you can plot picked data and so on. And you can, of course, edit anything here using the good old matplotlib package. But that would be too much into the Python side. I think so. Decided to not spend too much time on talking about how to do the more detailed Python stuff and thinking about talking more about the GPRPy packages here, if everyone is happy with that. Hey, was this too fast or oh yes, Sinasa said, should I reinstall? And the answer is yes. And the way you reinstall GPRPy is that you first need to remove the old version. And to remove the old version, what you need to do is you need to go to a folder that is not the folder that contains all the GPRPy stuff, and there type pip uninstall GPRPy. I'm not going to press enter now because otherwise I'll need to reinstall it. That's how you do it. If you try to do that inside the GPRPy folder, then it will, so that would be the GPRPy master folder, then it will not work because it will be confused. Which GPRPy do you mean? The folder that is in here or, the actual program? Great. Okay. Quickly check where we stand. Okay, so let's have a look at the common midpoint wide angle reflection and refraction processing. Yeah, that one is cool. And then let's go back into interface interpolation and data cubes if we have enough time. Okay, otherwise, we can go a little bit over time or do a GPRPy 2 or whatever you all prefer. Okay, so I closed GPRPy. It's not running at the moment, so I'm now going to run it in the common midpoint or wide angle and reflection and refraction mode. So that's just with a C here. And as you can see, this user interface looks different. I didn't put a splash screen here because probably not as many people use this one here as the first one. And the idea for this is if you have a system where you can move your transmitter and receiver antenna individually, then you can get velocity information if you have a horizontal interface somewhere at depth. With a dipping interface, you would need to use some more advanced tools, but I only implemented horizontal interfaces here. But so what you can do, for example, is you can have your common midpoint and then have your transmitter and receiver on both sides and increase, of course, their separation and measure the same depth point over and over and over. And of course, from these travel times, you can then get the velocity, the average velocity of this upper unit here. You can, of course, also get an idea of the velocity closest to the surface by looking at the the ground wave, the direct wave that moves through the ground, and your air wave, the direct wave through the air, always gives you a check, that a sanity check, that you actually get 0.3 for that. If you get anything else, then either you broke physics or something went wrong with your data collection. I personally prefer wide angle reflection and refraction, where one of the two transmitter, either the transmitter or receiver, is fixed, and we only move the other one. And if you do that, then of course you don't always measure the same depth point, but if your interface is horizontal, you're still fine. And the reason why I like this one here is because what you can do is you can connect a trigger wheel to your receiver, for example, and then just basically collect a trace every inch, if you will. So you get a very high resolution wide angle reflection and refraction data set. On the other hand, with common midpoints, of course, it takes a while to move the antenna, so you can't easily get a whole a very high resolution signal unless you invest a lot of time, or you have something really cool where both are somehow on a trigger wheel. That I don't know how that would work. Okay, let's import data. We're going to go to, again, our GPRPy folder, example data. This is, again, sensors and software, common offset. Oh, not the common offset, I apologize. The WAR, of course, wide angle reflection and refraction. Again, you can pick either one of those. I'm going to change the file name here such that you all can see which one is open. Okay, so let's open either one. And we need to tell it if it's common midpoint or wide angle reflection and refraction, because that, of course, affects the how the separation is of the transmitter and receiver is defined. So this is wide angle refraction and refraction. And here we can see the data. On the y-axis is travel time, on the x-axis is antenna separation. Those two panels are not yet activated, so this y-axis means nothing at the moment until we have this one here activated. Okay, so again, let's play the same game. Maybe push up the contrast, maybe do blue, white, red. Okay, we can start seeing something. Of course, we have straight lines from the airwaves. So the straight line up here is of course, the air wave in the direct wave in air, and this straight line here is the direct wave through the ground. And we do have a pretty cool hyperbola here, which would be a reflection off of an interface at depth. What we can do now, I again like to just cut where we don't really have much signal anymore. Let's say we cut at 300 nanoseconds. We can do that again. It's this this graphical user interface is very similar to the previous one, where up here we have settings for appearance, the undo button here, import data here, and these are the very, very similar processing buttons. So let's say truncate Y again at, I think, 300 maybe. Again, when we click, we get the coordinates. Maximum travel time, we said 300. Okay. And again, full view. Okay, now we can see this hyperbola and everything even a little bit better. So how do we get velocities from that? Well, of course, we could just like eyeball and guess. For example, here, this straight line here should hopefully be 0.1 meters per second. We can test that using the add line, remove line, add hyperbola, remove hyperbola buttons. So add line would allow us to plot a straight line. But before I do that, let me quickly click on here such that I know what would be the time here. I did set the recording time to be 0 when the first in the field when the first arrival appeared. So it's a little bit shifted here, but that doesn't really matter, right? We just want to know the velocity. So okay, let's draw a line with velocity. Well, we hope it's the speed of light in air, so 0.3. And then 0 travel time, let's do this number here, -11, which I just picked. That means we want to have this point here as the beginning of our straight line. And yeah, it fits quite nicely. Oh, someone just asked, could full waveform be applied on GPR data, wide angle reflection and refraction? Possibly. I've never done GPR full waveform inversion. I think the people to talk about that are Anja Klotsche in Germany and Sarah Cruz at University of Florida. Shout out to those two. They know much more about how to do that in a good way. But generally, full waveform inversion is quite a headache, I think, not only for GPR, but also for seismics. And I like simple. But if it works, then that's, of course, really cool. Okay, so we can draw straight lines with these buttons. Draw a hyperbola, we can remove it again. Draw a hyperbola, for example. Oh, where do we want to put it? Let's say this one here. This one here looks quite nice. So I'm going to click here. This will give us the two-way travel time of 81 for the apex. So let's draw a hyperbola. Let's say velocity. I'm just guessing something. Let's do 0.13. And zero travel time, we set 81, which I read up here. This does not actually match that nicely. We can always add another hyperbola. This button here toggles them on and off. Okay, so that's one way of figuring out the velocity. We could just play around until we get a good number. But what is better, or more useful or easier, is if the computer does it for us. And so I wrote a little stacked amplitude for hyperbola and straight lines soft program, which what it does is you give it a range of velocities and a range of zero travel times. And for each velocity and zero travel time, it draws a line, and then it just adds up the pixel values. So if you go over red and blue, then those two cancel each other out because one is positive, one is negative. But if you stay along a consistent blue one, you get a large single value, or if you stay along a red one, you get a large single value. Maybe before we do that, let's do a little bit more pre-processing. Maybe we want to do DWOW because we can clearly see there's an offset from 0. Again, like simple, just subtract from each trace the total average. And normalize just takes the root mean square value of each trace and divides it by that, such that these traces for greater transmitter and receiver antenna distances are a little bit stronger, and our results are not just dominated by what we measure when the antennae are close together. So this is after a normalization step. Looks a little bit different. Now the focus is more on what is further out. Of course, there are other ways of normalizing. You can also do a TPOW or AGC, again, are implemented. But so let's run that stacked amplitude calculation. So let's let the computer draw a whole lot of lines and add up the pixel values. So the linear stacked amplitude button does that. And that may take a few seconds. And here we go. Okay, what kind of straight lines do we see? The colors here denote how the absolute value of your numbers. So if you add blue, 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 blue consistently, then you would get a large absolute value. If you add red, 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 red consistently, you would get a large absolute value. If you add blue, red, red, blue, then they average out. And so it's going to be closer to 0. And so the brighter colors here are larger absolute values. I can see something over here. That is, when I click on it, I get 0.3 meters per second. X-axis is the velocity, and y-axis is the zero offset travel time. So I get 0.3 over here, and when I click this one here has a lower velocity. I get, let's see how well we can click. I get 0.1 pretty much for this straight line here. We can then, of course, draw this one over here. We can say, okay, these are our velocity is 0.1, and our travel time offset is -5 nanoseconds. So let's draw that line on top of here, and we get the velocity is at 0.1, zero travel time at -5. Yep, that's exactly this line here shows up really nicely, consistently as that dot. And of course, we can do the same with hyperbole, stacked amplitudes. Click on it, take a few seconds. And it now just draws a whole bunch of hyperbole for different velocities, which are on the x-axis, and different zero offset travel time, which are on the y-axis. And as you can see, we have some quite nice hyperbole values here. This one looks big, 0.1 meters per second and 75 seconds apex velocity. Let's draw that one. Velocity is 0.1 and the apex is at 75. Yep, that's exactly this hyperbola here. Great. So this is how we can use this software if you have transmitter receiver antenna that can move individually. And again, you know, can print figure. You can again write a script that redoes the whole analysis for you. If you want this to be a little bit more smooth, you can set the velocity range. So you can say, let's don't go all the way to like 0.01. That makes no sense. So let's do 0.06 as the minimum. Maximum. I always like to have the speed of light clearly in there such that I can check the velocity step size. I don't know. Let's make it quite smooth. And then we would need to redo it in your stacked amplitude, which probably takes a little bit longer now. There should be a progress bar. Oh, it's already done. It's not that much smoother. Okay. Maybe we need to have an even smaller size step for the y-axis to have it even smoother. Okay, so this is what I wanted to talk about, common midpoint VAR processing. I'm glad we got through both of those. We can still talk about interface interpolation and data cubes. I also saw that there's just another question. If I know of any open source software that includes a full waveform inversion algorithm. Yes, I think SeisFlows is for Seismics, a full waveform software, and it's based on, I forget, I haven't done much Seismics actually. So SeisFlows can do that. Yeah, but I think it's highly non-trivial to use it for GPR data. I think a lot of people have been working on that, and I've seen some pretty cool results for cross borehole, but for surface-based, I haven't yet seen anything that really convinced me. Okay, so Chris and Laurie, how do you want to move on from here?
I have time. We want to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I can still at the very least just share the links again for the SAG YouTube channel, just so people who do need to take off in a couple minutes can have that ready for when the recording becomes available, so they can catch up on the rest of this. But I'm going to continue a bit past 11:30.
Great, yeah, I'm happy too. I know this is maybe really, really fast. I feel it's probably a difficult balance to make the people who are just starting out with ground penetrating radar happy, as well as the people who've studied this like for 50 years. So yeah, but I hope that everyone is getting a little bit something out of this. And again, the whole goal of GPRPy is to be as simple as possible. So all of these advanced things are just not there. Part of it because I haven't developed those advanced things and haven't worked with them, but part also because I just really like the simplicity of just working with data. Someone just said, Anna, the semblance plot, the hyperbolic stack didn't update because you pressed the linear stamp. Oh yeah, I noticed that. So I pressed the linear stacked amp, and it did update. It showed a different starting velocity, but it's still kind of blocky. You know, I wanted to have it even smoother. So let's do that again. Let's do it very smooth. 0.001. Okay. And now let's, as you can see, there is a little progress bar. Okay, now it looks more production ready, right? And when you click on print figure, then it also export these figure, both as a single thing as well as individually. So let's maybe quickly do this as a demo. Again, resolution. I like to have control over how big my files are versus how smooth they are. I know that sometimes when you submit something to a journal, they just make the figures really sad. And with this, you have control over that at least a little bit. Okay, so here we now got the war fig, which is the overall figure here. And then we have individual ones for data, stacked amplitude, and hyperbola, and as well as linear. Cool. Okay. And then again, we have this write script, which can also help you then, if you want to change how the figure would look like, you can edit that in Python. Okay, so let's do interface interpolation. And this is now really moving more towards the scripting part, where you do have to have some basic understanding of Python. So far, you could basically get away with just clicking through things, but now we need to have a little bit of scripting. Okay, so what we did earlier is PyPix, I wanted to call it MyPix. Well, now it's called PyPix. Okay, so we picked along the profile interface and saved those pics in the 3D UTM coordinates, or if you use your own 3D system, as long as it's meters versus meters versus meters, you're fine. So here, these are the UTM coordinates of our pics, of that interface that we did a very careful job with. And what I want to do now is I want to maybe turn these into a three-dimensional surface. Remember that on ParaView, let's see if I have ParaView still open. On ParaView, our surface here is not a straight line. It's kind of waving around quite a little bit, our profile, I mean. And so we have data points that are along this profile, and so them together can form a surface. But this works even better if you have, for example, a couple of profiles and you pick the same interface along a couple of profiles. Then you can use these picked data points in UTM to create a surface between them. I'm just now going to demonstrate it for the points that we picked. But if you have such points from several profiles, just put them all into one big ASCII file. You don't even need to have spaces between your lists. You can, let's say, for example, just add them here, so copy them over from a different file. I'm not going to do that because otherwise I have the same data point several times, which could mess up interpolation. Maybe not, I don't think so. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, I didn't write a graphical user interface for that, but there is an example script in our GPR Pi folder. If you go to example scripts, here I have example make surface. So I'm just going to copy that one over to here, our folder where we saved all our figures and everything. And yeah, I'll keep the same name. So let's open this one. And there are basically 4 different ways of how you can do that interpolation. You can use spline, you can use nearest neighbor, you can use cubic or linear. I personally really like spline, so let's just delete all the other ones. And this is just a Python program that loads GPRPy and then uses this interp surface Python function to create such a surface and export it in 3D again as a VTS file. And so you just need to give it the file name. What was our file name here? It was just pypix_3D. I spell this correctly? No, of course not. The P must be capitalized. .txt, of course, because it's an ASCII text file. This is what we want to call it. Let's just call it example serve. Then we can give it how many X samples, how many Y samples. We want to use spline. And this here is the spline order in X direction and Y direction. The higher you make those, the more faithfully it will follow your picked points. The lower you make those, the smoother it will be. Let's make it quite smooth, like this, for example. You can always play with those and try it again. And we can just run this script by using Python, example, make surface. This is what it's called here. And oh, it's already done. So we should now have example serve. This is it. And we can now also load this in ParaView. Example serve. And here it is. If you try this at home and your profile is kind of like up here and your surface is down here, then that's because you exported your profile with a different aspect ratio from 1. I'm still kind of debating if I should just always force aspect ratio to 1 when exporting in VTK. But yeah, if something like that happens, you know, you can just always go into your exported script, change aspect ratio to 1, run it again, and it's all fine. Okay. Someone just asked, what approach would you recommend to create depth or time slices? Yes, we're gonna get into that one right away. Actually, that's the next and last topic. Great, thank you for asking. Any other questions about this surface interpolation? By the way, the paper, the SCG leading edge paper, GPR Pi paper, that one has a couple of such examples, and this GPR data folder that are also in the notes for this talk. Those are also those are for that specific paper actually. Okay, someone just asked, is the surface interpolation already implemented into the main code? Yes, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, this is all when you install GPR Pi, all of this is installed. You don't need to install anything extra. Yeah, good question. Thank you. Oh, the graphical user interface. The ParaView. So ParaView is separate. And I didn't write a graphical user interface to do the surface interpolation. To do this script here, I didn't write the graphical user interface. Oh, exporting to VTK from PICs. Okay, that question. From PICs, when you save the PICs, they will be stored as a text file, an ASCII file with the 3D coordinates. And then what I did is I used this script here to turn this these data points, 3D data points or picked points into a surface. So that's what I did. Sorry, I was maybe a little bit too fast with that. But thank you for asking. I'm always happy to.
And on the your function of exporting VTK from the PICs, is that in the GPR, like is that in the GPRPy GUI, or is that just API?
No, so okay, do you mean how to get the points that I picked into the text file, the 3D text file? Or do you mean how to get the profile into VTK? Or do you mean how to get the picked points into a 3D surface VTK?
I think pick points into VTK.
Okay, pick points into VTK. So these I got the so when I pick the points, after I pick the points in the profile, so I click on start pick, then I pick the points, and I click on stop pick, and then it asks me for a file name. I provide the file name, and it stores those points in that text file that back then I called PyPix. And so these numbers here are the 3D coordinates of the pick points that were exported from the GPRPy graphical user interface. But it can only export 3D points if you use 3D points for your profile. Yeah.
Gotcha,
And then once we
thanks.
have those, we can use this little script here to translate, it's actually just one line, to translate the picked points that from the graphical user interface were exported in 3D into a VTK surface.
Gotcha, thanks.
Great. No, thank you so much for asking. I know this is like, I kind of like do this all the time. So it's like, I'm really fast and I don't want to waste everyone's time. And then of course, yeah. Thank you so much for asking. Okay, shall we go to the data cube? Okay, so for the data cube, we need the extra data file that was also linked earlier called GPR data. You can find those on GitHub as well. If I Google GPR data, GitHub Plattner, you can find it here. And if you download it again through the zip file, then it will show up as folder called GPR data -master. And in here, there are a couple of examples that are for the SEG paper, for the leading edge paper that I mentioned earlier. They're described in there. Okay, and so we're going to work with the example data cube data. So the way this is organized is, or basically, let me first quickly show you generally what the data are. Okay, so imagine we're in the Mediterranean, in Cyprus, and this is a field that we're now looking at from above, and there was an excavation that showed some quite amazing structure that are roughly 2,500 years old, like an ancient temple. And this is just in a field, an agricultural field, and it's very clay rich. So my old PhD advisor told me, don't even bring the GPR, there's no use. Of course, I still brought the GPR and I still tried to collect some data. So the question was that, is that temple alone in that field or are there other structures around it? And so we first tried to just get a couple of profiles, and it was with a 400 megahertz GSSI system, and it's too clay rich, couldn't really see much. And so, of course, I wouldn't want to stop. And what I said is, let's try the following. Let's make a very small area, only very dense, where we basically every 20 centimeters, we do parallel to x-axis profile and parallel to y-axis profiles every 20 centimeters. So this is a really, really, really dense grid of data. And then see if we can get something from that, because sometimes, from many data files, you can see a little bit more than just from several profiles, you can see more than just from one. And so the way I organize these data is, this is grid directory 1 raw data. So here are all the DCT files that are parallel to the x-axis. And then here are all the DZT files that are parallel to the y-axis. And I didn't have any topography. It was basically flat. But what I created is, for each line, I just say, okay, we have one start point and one end point. And this is the x coordinate, y coordinate, and z coordinate of the start point, x coordinate, y coordinate, and z coordinate of the end point. Okay, this one, as you see, is actually parallel to the y axis because we end at x equals 9 meters. So I just wrote these in there. This one is at 1 meter parallel, and so on. You can also do them automatically, the prepare topo file would do that automatically. So it just created a couple of for loops. And what it does is it just creates these topo lines and puts in the first coordinate, the first coordinate in X, Y, Z, and then the last coordinate in X, Y, Z. This is, I'm not going to go into detail about how I automatically created these topo coordinates, because you can even write them yourself if you like to. Okay, so this instructions file shows what to do. Create prepare topo, you actually don't even need to do anymore. But so what I did is I did a little bit of processing. So let's have a look at this process all script. Basically, what I did is all of these lines here are from when I used GPRPy to do processing in the graphical user interface. And then at the end, I said, write script. And then what I did is I just copy pasted these lines from my hand processing into here and put it into a for loop. Of course, what you could do is you could go to every single one of these files. There are, well, how many are there? 46 plus 46, there are 92 files. So you could hand process 92 profiles if you wanted to. Let's actually have a look at one of those. Let's import data. This is sample data cube. Yeah. So some of the processing that I did, let me show again which file this is. This is now GPR data master. Slash example data cube slash raw data. And here, I think I just took the first one. Okay. So that's the data we're currently looking at. And as you can see, I just see these reverberations of the EM wave, of the radar wave in the clay, in the top surface, and I see almost nothing. What I would do is maybe set the 0 time to here. That would be at almost 5, about 5 nanoseconds. So set 0 time this to 5 nanoseconds, and then it's really, really difficult to see anything in here. Definitely remove a mean trace. Let's maybe remove all of those. But yeah, it's an incredibly difficult data set to see anything. Perhaps there is something here, but without looking at them in context with other profiles, it's really, you can't really see much. But so this kind of processing that I did, I think I also maybe cut a little bit here, and I think I set a velocity, and I think I did do some migration. We can look at every single step in this file here, the process all file in the folder example data cube. So as you can see, I did set a velocity and did migration, and then gave it the coordinates, the 3D coordinates of the beginning and the end of each profile that we talked about earlier. Okay, and so if you run process all, it will just do this for each file for you, and you don't need to do this for every single one by hand, because I just put it into a for loop here. What you can do, of course, if you have your own profiles in a 3D manner that you want to all process at the same time, then you can really just use this here as a template and kick out what you don't need and put in what you do need. So if we run this one here, let me close GPRPy. if we run this one here, so let's go to GPR data example cube. Python process all pi. So I'm just going to run this processing script. And it's now going to process all of these and save them as GPR files. Of course, you can also do that by hand. But so basically what you need to be able to create a data cube is you need a list of file names with that are .gpr files. So they're processed and saved in GPRPy. And then you can, and they need to have 3D coordinates, and then you can use the this create data cube function. So what you need is just a list, which is just the file names. What I do here in these for loops is I just add all of these file names, but you could also just do it by hand like this. And then, oh, someone asked, what is the extent of the area for the 20 centimeters times 20 centimeters lines? It's 9 by 9 meters. So it's tiny. Yeah, just super high resolution that we tried. Okay, but so once you have this list, you can do that using the for loops, or you can create it by hand. Once you have this list, then it's again just a single line where you give it the list of the file names, the output file name, you could call it mycube to make it easier to find it later. The interpolation in X direction, interpolation in Y direction, and vertical interpolation. And then here I put in some Gaussian smoothing. And I also use, instead of the plus minus values, I use the absolute values, but you can turn that off. The reason why I like to use the absolute values is because, let's say in our profile, right, our wave will look, our trace will look like this. So if we want to use smoothing between those, then this can smooth out to 0. But if I take the absolute value, then we'll get something like this. And if I now smooth this out, it will turn into a nice big signal. That's why I prefer to use the absolute values, but you don't have to. So you can set that to false. You can also set the smoothing to 0, 0, 0. Let's try that one. Why don't we just start with the crudest possible thing? Let's call it mycube crude. And yeah, I can just run this script again, which will first create the list and then create the data cube from the list. So let's do Python data cube. Take a few seconds because, well, it's a lot of data that needs to be interpolated. 96 profiles, and each profile has a lot of traces. Okay, done. So this is now saved as mycube crude. Let's see if we have, nope, it's not open anymore. So I'm going to open pair view again. And let's have a look at this. We want to, of course, see the surface. Okay, it's kind of difficult, but, very likely we see something here and here. The cool thing with pair view is that you can actually cut slices through things. Let's, for example, cut a slice that is normal to the z-axis, and this one here is in the middle. That's good. Let's apply it. And it's still consistently, oops. It's still consistently there, right? You all see what I mean? But it's really difficult to see. So the goal of the processing is, of course, to bring this out a little bit more. And, well, what we could do is, no, that's not the right file. What we could do is do what I mentioned, or what we had earlier, where we just use the the smoothing, and the absolute values. And of course, again, I tried out a couple of different values to see what brings it out the best, and felt like this one here worked the best. So let's do the same interpolation again, but with smoothing, absolute values, and store it into a file called mycube. Will be done soon. Okay, done. So let's open that one. Again, let's look at the surface. Okay, this looks better, right? One thing that I really like in peer review is that you can show thresholds. So we want to see the strongest, the highest values. That's where there's a signal bouncing back. So that could be a wall if there is one. So let's do something like maybe like this as the bottom and all the way up to the maximum. Okay, and this, yeah, let's show this one here as an outline maybe. Okay, so this is then what seems to be, to me, this looks like archaeological walls, because you very rarely in nature have straight things that meet at right angles, but these are probably walls from ancient buildings. So let's have a look at this from above. So if I remember correctly, then I think the temple or so was somewhere there. So this must have been a structure, a building close to the temple. Okay, so this is basically what I wanted to show. I know some of that was maybe a little bit fast, but I still hope that by watching it again or going through the examples, like in your own time, you'll be able to get the most out of it. What other kinds of questions are there, or any comments or anything?
I'll say if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to either throw them into the Sidney's got a question.
Yeah, that is a great question. For topography, does the number of readings matter? I.e., does GPRPy assume that the first point of the input file is the first trace and the last point is the last trace, the rest interpolated? The answer is it depends. If you provide your topography point as a profile, then if your first profile point in your topography is at 5 meters, but your profile starts at 0, then I think it just assumes that before 0, it's just horizontal. But if you give your if you provide the topography as UTM coordinates, so 3D coordinates, in that case you do need to have the first UTM coordinate for the first trace and the last UTM coordinate for the last trace. So there it matters more. And yes, it's correct. In between, it just interpolates linearly. Yeah. And someone just asks, I saw in the flow that topocorrect is applied after migration. Why not before? I typically get ugly results if I do it before. Also because the way I do topography correction is I pad, is it nans or zeros above and below, and then I shift. And so you would get these either nans or zeros into your migration if you do it only after topography correction. And there may, of course, be better ways of implementing that. And I'm obviously always eager to see how GPRPy can be improved. I just did it the simplest possible way. I like simple. But I can go through showing that quickly if someone would like that, or anyone would like that. Okay, someone said, how about adding the normal move out correction to flatten the hyperbolas next to the semblance plot? Yeah, that would be a possibility. So that would then add, let me quickly open. That would then, would you do that in that would then add another and what is it called? Another panel. So it would make it a little bit more crowded. And then, but yeah, that's possible. Or maybe I could just, normal move out correction is not that complicated. Could just be a script that does that in the figure. Yeah. That's a cool idea. Thanks. I'm used to looking at seismic data. Does it matter when you adjust for topography? Probably. I probably you would get different outputs. My personal philosophy is if things matter too much, then it may not be the original data that supports the result, but the processing. So if I get basically a very similar answer with whatever processing I do, then I consider that a robust result driven by the data. But if some processing gives me one answer, other processing gives me another answer, then, I'm not so sure about how much I would trust the results. But yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. I think so. In ground penetrating radar, the velocity is not, varies maybe by one order, varies maybe by a factor of two. In seismics, the velocity varies by an order of magnitude, right? So that's a pretty big difference between the two. What was the T0 for migration start time of data or the topographic surface? T0 is basically the first point of where you have data. So if you let's say you import data that no one that we had here. So as you can see here, if we set the Y range to -10 to, let's say, 100. So here, T0 is basically your very first pixel point. So it actually just uses the pixel matrix to run migration. And because of that, if you, let's say, set the velocity and then do topography correction and then do migration, all of these values that are shown in white, I think they're nans. They'll be part of the migration, and now everything is a nan. Now migration is gone. Killed everything. Okay. Not sure why. Let's see if it's no. Okay, I don't know. It must have killed it so much that everything is now nan. I'll look into that. But yeah, it shouldn't happen if you just do the migration first and then the topography correction. Yeah, no problem there. Yeah, I don't know what kills it when you do it the other way around. I'll look into that. It's the first time that I saw that bug. Thank you. Anything else?
Any more questions?
I think we might be. I think we might be all set.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. And thank you so much for, using GPRPy and yeah, it's fun to see that something that started as a, just a little code that my students could use for data processing, that it finds some use in the real world. And yes, please contact me through email. I'm sometimes slow at responding, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to respond. It's just it could take sometimes a week or so. But yes, please contact me, and I'm happy to. If you're stuck somewhere with GPRPy and for a research project or so, I'm also happy to help. Happy to collaborate, of course. Cool. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks so much, Alon, for taking the time to run through so many of the capabilities that GPRPy has, and for helping to guide people through the installation and the usage of it. It was very, very good and very clear, pleasant presentations.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, thank you everyone for taking the time to be with us today. We're attending SCG Near Surface Geophysics Technical Section Student Subcommittee's Open Source Software Series webinar on GPRPy. An email will be coming out, will be sent out following up with all this, asking for any comments about what you thought of this webinar, anything else you would like to see. So let us know what you liked, could it be done better, suggestions for future topics. And also continue to look on our social media posts for any future webinars. Next month we'll have one on as part of our critical skills series, which I think, Lori, I think the next one is
Network at an in-person conference.
Yeah, how to network at an in-person conference. So with Image coming up in just a few months, it'll be a very, very, very pertinent one. And then in June, I believe we actually have 2 open source software webinars. We have I believe eMagPy, and then we'll have a follow-up to ResiPy. So a lot of good stuff to look out for. So keep your eyes up for that. And I'll share the link to our, there we go, to our YouTube channel again. The recording, after it's available and edited, will be added to our open source software webinar playlist. So keep an eye out for that over the next couple days. And yeah, thank you again, everyone. Thank you again, Alon, for taking the time and running through all this.
Thank you, everyone.